Good afternoon and welcome to today's caregiver webinar, Brain Fitness, Keys to Extending Independence. My name is Allegra Jaffe, and I am a social service specialist with the Caregiver and Supportive Service Unit with the Fairfax Area Agency on Aging. Before I introduce today's speaker, I will go over a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation is being recorded, and a recording will be sent to all registrants a week from today. We have enabled closed captioning in case you need it. Also, there is a Q&A button where you can submit your questions. We will do our questions at the end of the presentation. And lastly, there will be a brief survey as you sign out. So please take a moment to fill out that survey because it does help us create programs that are relevant and important to our caregiving community. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's instructor, Dr. Ellen Clark. Dr. Clark earned her PhD in Human Factors and Applied Cognition from George Mason University, where she led pioneering researching on improving brain health and extending independence in older adults. Upon a graduation, she worked with a variety of respected institutions, including Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the U.S. Naval Research Lab, and Blue Cross Blue Shield. In 2016, she formed Brain Evolved to bring this work to the older adult public. Dr. Clark, welcome and thank you so much for being here today. We are looking forward to your presentation, so please take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here as well. So let me pull my presentation up here. Okay. So just like Allegra said, today the topic of conversation is brain fitness and the keys to extending independence. So for a long time, we have known that in order to maintain our physical health, we need to keep up with our physical fitness. But recently, we also have realized that the same sort of concepts should be applied or can be applied to our brain and our brain health. And so those are the kinds of things that we'll be talking about today. So if you take one thing away from the talk today, I hope it's that multi-domain brain training is something that can really help you extend your independent years and just your independence in general. And we're going to talk all about exactly what multi-domain brain training is. And Allegra already did a really great job at introducing me, so I don't feel like I need to go over it again, but in case you're wanting to look at my credentials again, here they are, and this is why I'm qualified to be here talking with you about what we're talking about today. So because my background is so in the field of science and academics, I figured that would be a good place to start. So I've pulled here a chart from a research article, a review article actually, that looks at all of the findings that we had in the field on this topic of our cognitive abilities as we age. And so what the graph shows is we've got cognition from low to high here on the vertical axis and then age on the horizontal axis. And then in the middle, the light gray shaded area represents anywhere that you might be able to fall on the cognitive scale throughout the lifespan based on your genetic abilities or, a theoretical person's genetic abilities. So you can see there's a good amount of range at each age that we have, but where exactly you fall within these genetic presets is a factor of your environment and the choices that you make and the choices that are made for you in some cases. And so what we have here with the red line is what a typical progression looks like for somebody with this set of genetic presets. And the most important part of the graph actually isn't even on the screen yet, but it's coming up right now. And that's this light blue dotted line that we call the threshold for independence. So as long as you're above this threshold, you're able to live on your own independently. But once you fall below the threshold, you're no longer able to live independently, and you're likely experiencing the kind of dysfunction that we often associate with something like dementia. And when we follow this kind of line out here of this typical person, we see that they are crossing the threshold around age 75, which is pretty sad because there's really still a lot of life to live after 75. So what we want to know is how can we kind of change the trajectory of this line, even if we're not starting with these changes until later in life. So how can we kind of, push out that slope and get it to look more like this green slope here? And because when we do that, here we have intervention starting at age 60. This pushes out the crossover of the threshold from 75 to closer to 90. So it's a pretty substantial number of additional years. And the way that we do this, or that they theorize that this can be done in the article, was through the use of multi-domain brain training. So now the all important question, right? What is multi-domain brain training? And I think the most important thing to remember is that multi-domain brain training is not something that we're all very familiar with, which is lumosity. So most people are familiar with lumosity to some extent, and lumosity is brain training, but it is not multi-domain. It is an example of singular domain. So singular domain training, like lumosity, uses one type of intervention to try to improve brain health. In the case of lumosity, this is something we call cognitive training games. So yes, there are different types of cognitive training games that you play on lumosity, but at the end of the day, they are all cognitive training games. So it's a singular domain approach to brain health. And unfortunately, it's just not as effective as the multi-domain brain training can be. So when we're looking at multi-domain brain training, what we're looking at is different types of intervention. So we've got 4 different ones here, and they are combined into this kind of holistic approach to improving brain health. So what does it look like when we do a multi-domain brain training program in terms of results? I pulled 2 charts here from different articles that actually ran multi-domain training programs. The one on the left in the yellow shaded background, this used healthy older adults. So healthy aging, that means they had no evidence of something like a dementia or a stroke. And these people, after using the multi-domain brain training, saw improvements on basically every cognitive measure. Overall cognition improved 25%, executive function, which is just kind of a fancy word for strategy, multitasking, those kinds of things, 83% improvement. Speed of processing, 150% improvement here. And speed of processing is basically your ability to kind of use the information that's presented to you in the world at a certain pace. This is most often associated with something like driving. And so you can see how, especially executive function and speed of processing can really impact somebody's daily life. So huge improvements there. And now when you look over to the right with the light blue shaded background, this graph was from an article where they looked at individuals who were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So in this case, the individuals with Alzheimer's disease were grouped into 4 different categories. And so one group, which is represented by the blue line, they were given nothing. Another group, which was the red line, was given medication. That was the best medication available at the time of the study, which was Aricept. The yellow just received cognitive training, multi-domain training that was appropriate for Alzheimer's patients. And then the black line is individuals that were given both the training and the medication. And what we can see is that at baseline, or baseline just means when the study was started before anybody was divided into groups, we can see that they're all the same. And if you ran the numbers, you would see there's no significant difference between these groups at the start. But once you start measuring them after they begin these different interventions at 1 year and 2 years later, there is significant separation. And when you run the numbers, the significant separation only exists between the group that did nothing and the two groups that contain some kind of training, either training alone or training and medication. And so what this is showing us is not that you shouldn't take the medication, you should if your doctor recommends that you do, but that the training can be so powerful, and that the best route is the combination of the training with the medication. So the question is, how is training this powerful? It's non-pharmacological, so how can it have such a big impact? And the key to it is understanding a concept that we call neuroplasticity. And this is the ability of the brain to kind of grow and adapt and change over time. And this can be something that occurs throughout the lifespan. We used to think that it just stopped at a certain point in time, but we now know that this continues throughout the lifespan. And so all we have to do is try to figure out how to take advantage of this great plastic ability. And unfortunately, we haven't figured out the pharmaceuticals behind that yet, but we have figured out some of the non-pharmaceutical ways to take advantage. And so this is a great example that we often use to do a little bit of a demonstration of neuroplasticity. So just take a look at this image right here for a second. And so, it's not a difficult image. Most people know what it is right away. Most people don't see this. So this image can be a rabbit if you look at it in a certain way. And so if these are the ears, the eye is here, and the nose is here, it can be a rabbit. Most people see it as the duck, which has the bills here, the eye is still here, and then this becomes the back of the head. But once I pointed out to you how to see the other image, now you can probably see both pretty easily as you go back and forth. And so it's a really easy, quick demonstration of how adaptable the brain is with just some gentle suggestion and training. And what's also, I think, really interesting about this little exercise here is that while it always the majority of people see the duck, the closer in time you are to Easter, the more people see the rabbit, which is also just an interesting little priming effect for the time of year. So another interesting example of how we know that the brain can continually grow and adapt and change over time is that during different stages in life, we have different cognitive challenge areas and different cognitive strengths. So it's not that as we age that we get worse at everything. That's definitely not the case. We just have different areas of strength and challenges. So for the small child, they are going to have a strength in something we call speed of processing, which I touched on briefly earlier, often associated with driving. Obviously, for a small child, not going to be driving, but speed of processing for them is really their rate of learning and adapting, which they do at such rapid pace, which is great because their challenge area is attention, right? And so it's very difficult if you've ever met a child, I'm sure you know, it's very difficult to get them to sit down and pay attention for more than 30 seconds. So attention is their challenge area. And when we look at the older adult population, what we see is that the strength tends to be in an area we call crystallized intelligence, which is a fancy way of saying kind of wisdom and the knowledge of the world around you and how to best interact with it. And now the challenge area is something called executive function, which I also touched on earlier. And executive function relates to your ability to multitask and plan and execute on those things. And so a good example of this that I often give is, when you are making dinner and the phone rings and trying to navigate both of those tasks at the same time, this usually becomes more difficult as we get older. Now, this is not the case for everyone. These are general areas that we have found. And so your own personal strengths and challenges are going to be unique to you. And so that is why anytime that you're wanting to undertake some kind of training or some kind of program to help improve your brain health, the most important thing to start with is some kind of assessment so that you are aware of where your strengths and challenges lay. And that way you are able to effectively design a training plan to hopefully, ideally, take advantage of your strengths while boosting your challenges. So when we talk about a training plan, we want to look for a multi-domain training plan. At least that's the one that we're talking about today that has all the support in the literature. And so this is an example of a concrete multi-domain brain training program. It has 4 different types of cognitive interventions. It has a physical intervention, a social intervention, a stress relief, and a mental. And the mental would be similar to something like the cognitive training games or the like Lumosity style cognitive training game. And what we see when we look at this type of program specifically, they have, again, phenomenal results. And so I wanted to pull out another one, and I'll continue to pull out examples of just how much of an impact these kind of training can have, because it can be so huge. And so I really want to show the benefit here. And so this is somebody who did that program for 12 weeks, and they saw a 300% improvement in their strategy, 100% improvement in their focus. Their intelligence level was already at the top of the metric, 10 out of 10. And that did stay the same from start to finish. So good news there. When we're doing these programs, what this illustrates is that we're not just moving resources from one area to the other. We're not taking away from somewhere that's strong to put it in somewhere that was a challenge. No, we are creating new strengths in areas that used to be challenged. And so amazing kind of objective results here. But this individual also reported that they felt less overwhelmed, less kind of brain fog, and they were more confident in their everyday tasks. They went from kind of starting to shy away from hosting their friends to hosting their friends all the time and really enjoying it. So huge improvement in the quality of life as well. So now to talk about each one of these different types of interventions specifically, so you can get a better idea of the kinds of things that would help with this kind of multi-domain training. We'll start with physical exercise, because physical exercise is the one type of cognitive intervention with the most support in the literature. And partially because it has been around for a long time, right? We have been able to exercise our bodies for as long as we have existed. Whereas when you look at something kind of like, the cognitive training games on the computers, those are obviously more recent because computers were only invented so long ago. And so, but this has a huge amount of support in the literature. So if you were going to take a singular domain approach, this is probably the one area that you would want to focus on. However, it's also difficult because of a lot of different reasons. And number one on there is, of course, that you must be cleared by a physician in order to engage in physical activity. And this is not always possible for older adults in particular, or they might not be cleared for specific types of physical exercise, which can make things more difficult. Speaking of different types of exercises, how do you know which type of exercise is best? And how do you know which type of exercise is not only something that you will like, but also will benefit your brain health? Is it strength building? Is it stretching? Is it yoga? Is it Tai Chi? Is it running? Is it water aerobics? There are many different types out there. And then third is the biggest hurdle that most people face is motivation. right? Because not everybody likes physical exercise, but we all do know that it's good for us. So how do we overcome this issue of motivating ourselves to complete our physical exercise? Additionally, what we've actually recently been discovering in the literature is that even better than doing physical exercise alone is combining both mental and physical exercise together. Because when you combine them together, you can see more benefit than doing either alone. However, this also has to be done with a careful hand. And that's because it is easy to overload our system when we combine these two things. And you wouldn't think that adding a little bit of cognitive exercise to your physical routine would be that much of an additional drain on your resource, but it really and truly is. And so what you have to do when designing a program that combines these things is really make sure, number one, that the cognitive exercise is being inserted into the physical exercise at the right point in time to see the benefit, but also that they are in a good balance. The physical and cognitive are within a good balance of each other, so that one is not causing an overload on the other. And so, a big question that a lot of people have, again, is this motivation question. So how do we motivate ourselves to keep up with our exercise routines? And there are a lot of different ways that we can go about this. But some that we hear a lot are an exercise buddy, whether this be a person or an animal. This is a great benefit to having an animal, right? It requires that you get out there and walk it every day, or play, or throw the ball around. So that's a good one. Another one is some kind of reward, hopefully a healthy reward of some kind. There's also competition, so any kind of competitive metrics or measures, whether it's with a neighbor or using some kind of app that lets you compete against other people. This can also be a big motivator. Additionally, setting goals can be very helpful, and setting small incremental goals is the best way to do this, right? So, you don't want to say you're going to start running and that your goal is to run a marathon, right? That's a good end goal. But maybe you want to set a goal each week. Each week you want to be able, in week 1, you want to be able to run for 2 minutes straight, right? And then you kind of work up from there. And then you can also trying out different types of exercise to see if you can find one that really, really speaks to you, and it's something that you really enjoy and works with your lifestyle. I know for me personally, I've got a couple of kids, and so finding one that fits with my lifestyle is kind of, number one priority. And so I found that I didn't used to, but I've all of a sudden found myself a runner, because I can put my youngest in the stroller and run with the stroller. And so that way, able to get the exercise in and take care of at least one of my kids at the same time. So, finding something that fits for what you like and your lifestyle can be a big factor in making sure that you complete your exercise. Okay, and so the next area is something we call challenge, and this is the cognitive training game area. So when you're looking at different cognitive training games, what you want to look for is something that challenges the right areas while taking advantage of your strengths, which I talked about briefly before. And of course, you want to make sure that it's something engaging, right? We did a lot of this, in my academic studies, where we did cognitive training games that just were not very engaging, but we weren't looking to necessarily create the next addictive game. We were looking to study underlying properties. And so we, had very dry training things there, but when you're looking for something that you're actually going to do and actually going to want to complete without a researcher calling you every day and making sure that you're doing it, need to definitely make sure that it's something that you find fun and engaging. So when you go out and you're looking for a cognitive training game, what should you look for? And when we're looking in, and so what I'm going to use for the talk today is our general strength and challenge areas for older adults that I spoke about a little bit earlier, just because obviously I don't know everybody's individual. And so what you want to look for is something that has some element of that crystallized intelligence, that wisdom, and then also a good healthy portion that has an executive function component. So something with strategy, multitasking. So I pulled out a couple of things that we see very often, different types of games that people either ask me questions about, or that are commonly, that I see commonly being played in the older adult community. And so I just wanted to discuss where these particular games fall on the spectrum of crystallized intelligence and executive function. So crossword puzzles, we'll go to the answer key. So crossword puzzles in particular, I get asked about all the time. Somebody comes up to me and says, well, I do the crossword every day, or I do the crossword every week. So I feel like I'm really doing my brain, I'm really doing my brain training. And it's highly variable, but for most older adults, what we're seeing with crossword puzzles is a high level of crystallized intelligence, which is already a strength for most older adults, and is also the reason that many older adults do the crosswords and enjoy them, because you're doing something that you're good at and that comes easy to you. And so it's not necessarily challenging you in the way that it something else could. And so it's not necessarily hitting the mark for most people in terms of a brain training game. However, it can be a good stress reliever, which is one of our interventions too. And so if you find it relaxing, then that's definitely something that you can count towards your brain health. The next one was the original Mario. There are so many different types of Mario out there, and I know most older adults not big into the video games, but most of them do at least know what Mario is, and so I just wanted to pull that out as an example of a video game. Now Mario, again, also very high on crystallized intelligence, kind of wisdom, knowledge of the game and how the game works, is really going to help you do that. There's not a lot of that strategy and multitasking involved in Mario. It just kind of get from one end to the other. Now, probably the best one that we had on that list out there is Bridge, which is great because when I speak with older adults, most of them, respond positively to Bridge, and most of them have Bridge groups, which is great because it does have an element of crystallized intelligence or wisdom, knowledge of how the game works and the basics that you need to play. But then there's a mild level of executive function, strategy, and planning involved as well. So of the ones that are listed, Bridge is probably the best choice. It's still not an ideal choice, but it's much higher on the list. And now Bridge also has a social component, right? Because you play in teams. Excuse me. So Bridge also hits another one of our multi-domain training areas in socialization. So we like Bridge. And the last one is word in a word. And so I had a picture of this on the last one where basically someone will write on a whiteboard or on a chalkboard a word. The one up here is pedestrian. And then everybody has to kind of, or one person, depends on how many, need to say what kind of word you can make from pedestrian, right? So out of the letters in pedestrian, you can also spell the word rest, right? And you keep going and going and going until you have all of the words you can make. And so this is again really tapping that crystallized intelligence, that knowledge of that lexicon of words. There's not really a lot of strategy or multitasking involved with it. Okay. So the next pillar is stress relief. So stress is very harmful to the whole body, which includes the brain. There's a lot of negative effects. You would not believe the different effects that stress can have, that you would think there's no way, like this has definitely got to be a physical reaction, but in truth, it is stress. And I get a lot of people, I get a good number of people who come up to me and are very concerned about their brain health. And after speaking with them, we realize that a big contributor is actually stress. It can really impact your brain health, your memory, all those different things. And so when we look for stress relief, we usually find the most support in the literature for something we call mindfulness or breath work. And so you're going to look for something, if you're going and searching online afterwards, look for something that has mindfulness training or mindfulness exercise. It's going to take you through different kinds of breathing exercises and focusing on different areas of the body. Now, the biggest issue with stress relief is that it is also variable. So it goes from person to person as to what they find relaxing, right? Some people actually find exercise relaxing, right? I am actually one of those people. But a lot of people find exercise very stressful. So it has the opposite effect. So you really have to figure out what stress relief looks like for you. Mindfulness and breath work, I will say, usually this is like 95% of people find this relaxing. And so this is a good place to start if you're not sure where to start. So the other thing about stress is that you got to learn to identify stress, because the sooner that you can identify it, the sooner you can act on it, and the less negative effects that it will have on your body and mind. And so unfortunately, stress doesn't always present typically, right? And so we need to be able to recognize the signs of stress before they get to a point where we are forced to recognize them, right? So what are some different ways that you can indicate that someone's experiencing stress, right? So one of the most typical, right, is mood swings, right? Someone's snapping at you all the time, or you find yourself snapping or irritated by something maybe you're not usually irritated by. This is definitely an indicator of stress in a lot of cases. You can also find somebody isolating themselves. So a lot of people have different reactions to stress. Some people shut down and withdraw inside. And this is their reaction to stress. You can also see changes in sleeping or eating, and that is on both sides of those spectrums. So somebody can be sleeping a lot, somebody can be sleeping not at all, waking frequently, insomnia. With eating, same thing. We can eat a whole lot, we can stop eating at all, only eating certain things, all indicators of stress. And then of course there are physical manifestations. So you're talking about things like, it's such a variety. A lot of people experience stress in their stomach upsets and in their headaches, migraines, chest pain can be stress related. Just depends where you carry your stress. Back pain, it can be anywhere, because stress is just, it's terrible for the body. And then of course, like I spoke about earlier, is the increased issues with brain health and brain function, where we become more forgetful, not able to execute our daily tasks like we normally do. So socialization is, I feel, the unassuming cornerstone of any multi-domain training program, because it has such a profound effect, and people really don't or didn't recognize this for a long time. But now that we have been through COVID, I have had to speak less about this, because I think a lot of us have become aware as to just how important socialization is for our own brain health and our own well-being, after having to forcibly give it up for so long. And so it's good that COVID's done a little bit of my work there for me, but we first found this out in the scientific community, because trying to run these intervention studies, and the way you run an intervention study is you have at least two groups, right? One group that gets the treatment and one group that doesn't, and you see, if there's any differences between the groups after the intervention is over. Now, unfortunately, they kept seeing for a while improvements in both groups, and they just could not figure out what was going on. And so eventually what was discovered was that these kind of control groups, or the groups that were not getting anything, they actually were getting something, because they were getting a level of socialization from the researchers that they hadn't previously. So a lot of the participants in these studies were adults who didn't socialize frequently. And so when they began participating in the study, they were basically getting together with a group of seniors, or a group of other adults, and doing some kind of activity that wasn't supposed to impact your brain health, but getting together with other people and socializing was doing just that. Or even if they didn't do that, they were getting calls from the research assistant, and talking about how their day was going, how their week was going. And so this level of socialization that they hadn't had before was being introduced to them and creating these improvements in their brain health. And so from that point on, our control groups were run much differently to make sure we accounted for the impact of socialization. Now, the other thing with socialization, and what the pandemic has taught us, is that we really need to be able to take advantage of technology to meet our needs of socialization in times where it's just not possible or feasible. And we are very lucky to live in a time when we have those opportunities available to us. I would also like to stress too that this is one where we should really be looking out for each other, particularly in the older adult community. Social isolation can be not uncommon, and so doing what we can to help somebody with that is, to everyone's benefit. So one of the most classic examples of socialization is eating a meal together with other people. And this was severely impacted by the pandemic, right? Because, for those of us living not in a community, we still were not able to go out and eat with anybody outside of our household, or unlikely to do so. And for older adults living in communities, whereas before they would have the option and the opportunity, and most did go to a dining room or a dining hall or a restaurant on the community to eat, they began to have to take their meals and eat them alone in their apartments or homes. And so really restricted the socializing while eating. So the good news is that this has been studied, and it was actually studied before the pandemic. The article that I'm citing, you can see at the bottom of the slide, is from 2019. It was published in 2019. And it deals with the impacts of socializing while eating, and what those can be on older adults. And what it showed is that socializing while eating is positively associated with both intake and health. So if you're socializing while you're eating, you're actually more likely to eat more and be healthier. Now, for older adults, increased intake is actually something that we are aiming for. I know that may not be the case for some of the younger groups. I'm not a diet specialist, but I know particularly for the older adults, increased intake is often something that we're looking for. And this is even more amplified when our meal companions are family and friends. So people we know and like, hopefully. So also, as I said, socialization is something that we can really help each other out with, particularly in the older adult community, because social isolation is often the result of an increase in a mental difficulty or cognitive challenge, right? So if somebody starts to notice that they are not cognitively where they think they should be or where they were before, and they noticed a change, often they tend to start to withdraw and stay inside, and socialize less because they don't want other people to recognize what's going on with them, or they just don't feel comfortable for a variety of reasons. And unfortunately, pulling back on socialization is actually going to also have a negative impact on cognitive health. And so it's this vicious cycle that people get in. And what we need to do is do what we can to help these people get out of that cycle and, get back socializing and feeling comfortable in their environment. So those were the 4 pillars that were included in the multi-domain training with the results that I've shown. Sorry, so far, but there's also a couple of others that I think are also very important, although difficult to include in a multi-domain approach to training. And the first one is called, I just labeled diet. And I feel like, every other week there is some kind of article published somewhere about some miracle vitamin or food that will improve your brain health. Now, unfortunately, there is no single nutrient or food item that has been shown to have substantial support in the literature for improving brain health. However, there are diets that have shown great promise to its effect. And the basis for these is what we call the Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean diet is just, it's not a diet in the sense of the caloric restriction or anything like that. And it's actually a fairly easy one to implement, because all it does is it takes our kind of traditional American approach to eating, where we have the largest portion of our meal is usually meat, and then we have small side dishes of fruit and vegetables and grains. And what the Mediterranean diet is kind of reverses that a little bit. And so we do lots of plant-based foods. So lots of those grains and fruits and vegetables. And then we have small portions of the meat. And the diet actually also includes red wine, which is great. So I don't know a diet that's bad that includes red wine. So this is not a bad one, at least if you have to do a specific diet. Now, there's also a version of this called the MIND diet. So it's the Mediterranean diet applied that has been altered and adjusted a little bit specifically for improving brain health. And that one has great impacts too. It's very similar to the standard Mediterranean diet. It's newer. So the Mediterranean diet itself has a lot more studies and research and support. The MIND diet is very new, but the research that is coming out so far is very promising. And the reason that we don't include diet in a multi-domain training program is because this is not always something that is capable of being adjusted for any given individual, either because they have specific diet requirements because of other physical conditions, particularly this is common in older adults, or 2, they reside in a senior living community where the diet is controlled by the community. So, and then the final pillar that I wanted to talk about to good brain health and extending independence is sleep. Now, sleep is tough because there are some things in a multi-domain training program that can help with sleep. However, there are some things that really do require a physician in order to handle. So this is something that's kind of a blend. On the physician side, there might be a medical condition leading to sleep issues. We see this a lot with like sleep apnea, a lot of sleep apnea and the older adult population, and then medications and medication side effects. And so that all needs to be handled by a physician. On the multi-domain side of the house, lack of exercise, so taking on physical exercise can improve in addition to stress relief and socialization, which are other areas of training in the multi-domain program. And then finally, adjusting for sleep habits and environment can also become part of a multi-domain training program as well. Now, there is also overlap in pain management. So a physician can provide pain management through a variety of methods. Multi-domain training can provide pain management through some of the mindfulness techniques and the stress relief that I was speaking about. So another important thing to remember about multi-domain brain training is that it is not a piecemeal, it's not something you can piece together. You can't decide that you're just going to do some physical exercise here, some stress relief there, and like think it'll all eventually work itself out. It really needs to be a concentrated effort to include all of these different types of training on a consistent and regular basis, and to make sure that everything is being done as well as it should be. And I know it sounds like a lot of work to keep track of all of those things and put all of those things together, but the results are just astounding. I mean, this is a group of 4 people that did a multi-domain training program together at the same time. And I like this because we've got the 2 with the gray background have no history of any kind of neurological issue, healthy aging older adults, while the yellow background is somebody with a stroke history, and the purple background is somebody with early stage Alzheimer's. And what you can see is that all of these people showed tremendous improvement. And so this program or these multi-domain programs, they can be effective and helpful and have really, really strong impact for just about anybody in the healthy aging space. And even when we start looking at, not as healthy like stroke or Alzheimer's, they can still be helpful depending on the severity. And even if they are further along, if this was early stage Alzheimer's, but if somebody was further along, they would just need to find the training, the multi-domain training that was set up appropriately for Alzheimer's. The other thing that I get a lot is that people are concerned not only with the amount of effort that's required to kind of like keep track of this, but also the amount of time that they would need to spend in order to see these benefits. And the good news is that when we look at the amount of time, it's really not significant. And so you're going to want to spend about, we recommend 12 weeks doing a brain training program. And then after that, it can be even less intense. And some people see improvements as early as 8 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks. So it just depends on the person. But when we look at improvements after 12 weeks, what we see is that on average, people are spending about 76 minutes per week, which just comes out to about 10 minutes a day. So just 10 minutes a day on these kinds of brain training, multi-domain brain training programs can result in really significant benefits. And so it doesn't seem like it's a whole lot of time. Now, this does not include the social piece that I was speaking about, that social training. And that's because that can be very hard to quantify. And it's also the most enjoyable. So people don't usually think of that as counting towards it, right? So like If you're having lunch with your neighbors or taking a walk with your spouse, all of that counts towards socialization, and you probably do a lot of socialization in a week. And so we don't really count that towards these numbers here. And yeah, so I hope that, this talk was very helpful to everyone that came out today. And if you don't take anything else away, again, I hope it's that this multi-domain brain training can extend the independent years. And to give you one more resource too, the Alzheimer's Association has a whole section on this. So you can always feel free to look up more information from them, specifically on the articles that I cited today. And then this is my contact information. And of course, I am happy to answer any and all questions anytime.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ellen, for this great information. So at this time, I'm going to welcome the audience to put your questions into the Q&A box, and we can ask Dr. Ellen some questions here. I do have a few that came in already. Is your research / work tied with the efforts at the University of Texas?
No, I'm not affiliated with the University of Texas.
Okay. How effective are games such as the Pokemon Go that require people to investigate new areas to catch Pokemon, include some social connection as well?
Yeah, so my oldest is very into Pokemon Go, so I actually do know, I have a good understanding of Pokemon Go. And so, Pokemon Go is good, right? Because it's a kind of game that encourages people to kind of get out of the house and go places in order to catch these Pokemon. And there's a social concept there. And there is some strategy involved in it too. It's not a bad choice.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but again, it depends on the person, right? What their particular strengths and challenges are that they're trying to address.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Would you recommend different times of day for cognitive and physical exercise so the balance is good and the resources aren't drained?
Yeah. So that depends. A lot of times in older adults, we do see, that the mornings tend to be better. And so we try to do the cognitive and the physical earlier in the day. The stress relief, this kind of mindfulness work, that's something that we like to incorporate first thing right when they wake up and right before they go to bed at night too. And so that's one that kind of creeps into the evening, but usually earlier in the day.
Great. Where can folks find the program? Find a program like this?
So multi-domain training programs are not sort of out there as much. And so you can make, the effort to kind of put it together yourself. We do have a program. We usually are only in senior living communities, but we're running a pilot. So you're welcome to check out our website and let us know if you're interested in looking at the individual pilot.
But, another folks, someone else asked too, are there available structured programs to access? So that's kind of what you were saying, like this is, so basically here this is the different trainings, and then you see what works for you best. So what's the best exercise? What's the best right timing of the day? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And so, I mean, when you're looking at, a program like ours, it's designed specifically for the older adults, so 65 plus. And, we have an assessment, and based on the assessment, we're able to adjust the types of recommended trainings, the types of games, the types of physical exercise, difficulty levels, all that kind of thing. And so, you can also do that all on your own as you want to.
You can do it on your own, or you could get an assessment and work through it with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. We have a few questions coming in about different games.
Oh, yes. Of course.
Somebody is asking, how do you feel about Scrabble?
Yeah, Scrabble, it's got a little bit more of a strategy component. What I really like to see with a lot of these is more of a push on a time crunch. So a lot of times I want to see that speed of processing, which falls under executive function. It's a typical challenge area for most older adults. And so what I like to see is something that also has a timed element to it to kind of
Mm.
help, you know, make things go faster so that we can improve our speed of processing as well.
So some other folks asked like, how about Wordscape or Sudoku, Tangram puzzle, Big Boogle, Penta, Risk Rated.
Lots. Yes. So, yeah. And so, what you're looking for is just something that has an element of strategy or planning. And what I love to see again is that it's got a timed element where, you need to complete it within a certain amount of time. I even like when games like pop up ads in the middle of them. And I know that's super annoying.
Mm.
But that's actually a distraction, right? And so for then you to have to go back um, to complete the game makes it more difficult, and it's part of the training process.
Mm.
As far as that's what I
Yeah.
how I feel about it, anyways.
Can you suggest some free games to download from Apple Store? Someone asked.
um, I don't know. I mean, I think if I was looking for the free games, I would check out Brain HQ. They have a lot of good games that are designed for training, and they have a free version.
And is there someone asked like what's the best game for overall brain health? Is there one that's like this is the best?
So we did study this at one time, and Brain HQ is very good for the brain training games. If I had to pick one, it would be Brain HQ. There is also there's this program that they used to train there they used to use to train Israeli fighter pilots that we used, and that was actually the best, but it's super super boring. So I wouldn't recommend that as something that you think no one's going to do that long term without someone calling them all the time. um, and then the other one that we found decent results with is called Rise of Nations, and it's not usually very popular with older adults. Younger adults tend to enjoy it more, but it does do a decent job with strategy, multitasking, planning, and timing, and all that.
Mm, mm. Okay.
Yeah.
What tool do you use to assess people before starting the brain train program?
So ours in particular is a combination of three different. It's based on three different scientific, you know, measures that we use pretty commonly, and we've kind of made them a little bit more engaging to assess different areas of cognition.
Okay. What kind of evaluation do I need to start? Somebody asked.
Yeah, so I would find something that can basically give you a comprehensive overview. Ideally, a comprehensive overview of different areas of cognition. I would look specifically for things that measure executive function areas like working memory, attention, speed of processing. Um, those areas tend to be the challenge areas. So I would look for assessments that focused on those areas. And of course, if you're concerned about memory, I would throw in a memory one, although I have to say the vast majority of the time when people come to me with what they think is a memory issue, it actually ends up being um, an executive function issue.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make a mention, folks, it's about to be 1 o'clock in less than a minute. We will stay on 5 extra minutes to get in a few more questions. We'll do the best we can, but we will end at 1:05. If you do have to leave early, that's okay. We'll be sending you the recording a week from today. So we'll just try to get in a few more, Dr. Ellen. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
do you have names of the articles available that you spoke about?
Yes, so they're on all the slides, which I believe the slides are going to be distributed correctly.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they are at the bottom of the slides that will go out.
Perfect, perfect.
Yeah.
Um, someone asked also, you've already may have answered this one, but again, what about mind and trivia games?
Yeah, I'm okay. So
Do they have a
trivia,
timer?
yeah, nah, trivia is the strength area for most older adults. So that's that crystallized intelligence kind of piece. So it's going to be something that most older adults really like, and because they're good at it and it's easy, but it's not going to push the way that we would want to. It's similar to a crossword.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can people train themselves to handle greater and greater levels of stress? I'm thinking of healthcare providers and ER, firefighters, extreme sport athletes, etc.
I haven't done a lot of work with trying to improve somebody's ability to handle stress or increase levels of stress, but just to handle the stress that occurs naturally in the environment. And these mindfulness techniques can be wonderful for that. I know I, in particular, struggle with flying. I really hate flying. And so anytime I get on the airplane, for a long time, I'd have to put my headphones in and listen to a mindfulness exercise during takeoff and landing. And now that I've done it for a while, I just talk myself through the mindfulness training on takeoff and landing, and it's much, much easier now for me. So those kinds of things, yes, can be achieved.
Okay. Does depression affect the brain versus stress? Does it look different?
I mean, depression and stress both definitely affect the brain for sure. And I think depression is different from stress. And so I'm not qualified to say what counts as stress or depression, but they are definitely different.
Mhm, mhm. Is teaching young people a good way for old people to keep mental functions active?
Instruction. I mean, instruction, yes, but again, this is um it can be if you have to kind of try different techniques to get someone younger to pick something up, but you are imparting your knowledge, your wisdom, your crystallized intelligence on another person. And so you're not really forcing yourself to do anything new, if that makes sense, or challenge a new area for you. And so it's good to stay active and social, and there can be some strategy involved with trying to get them to understand what you're saying, but it's a large piece of that crystallized intelligence.
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah.
How do you feel about dance classes or Tai Chi?
Oh
Mental,
yeah.
physical, social?
Yeah, love dance and Tai Chi. They're both really great. And they both have great support in the literature too. So those are excellent choices.
Yeah, because dance too, it's very cognitive. You're constantly thinking and improving the body, right? And it's
Yeah,
following the
learning,
music.
yeah, especially if you're learning new dances. Yeah, definitely.
Terrific. Um,
Mhm.
someone else said they found music helpful.
Mhm.
Someone says this seems to be good for adults with attention deficits as well.
Yep.
Um, mhm.
Yep.
um, History is replete with examples of solitary people. What are the offsetting protective mechanisms that solitary people have against cognitive decline that people who have spent their lives immersed in socialization are missing?
Mhm. Well, there's a large amount of genetic variance in the population, right? And so when I'm talking today, and everything I talked about is on a general level. And when I showed the graph in the beginning that had the shaded area, and there's even for a given individual, there's a good degree of variance that's provided just by your genes. And then if you expand that to the entire population, there are just some people whose genetics are set up so that they just don't have the same kinds of requirements as other people. Everybody's brain is not the same. And so, yeah, there are definitely outliers out there, and
Mm.
are able, they meet their needs the way they meet their needs.
Well,
Yeah.
we are at 1:05, and we still have more questions, but we do have to end, folks. You have Dr. Ellen's contact information.
Yep,
So I'm sure you're more than welcome to reach out to her,
of
right,
course.
Dr. Ellen?
Yes,
Okay.
of course. Please do.
Perfect. Thank you again, Dr. Ellen, so much. This was, a lot of new knowledge, making me really want to also, I was like, I should be doing this. Everybody.
Same.
Right. And to our audience, thank you so much for making the space to be with us today. As you sign out, there will be a brief survey. Please take a moment to answer those questions and let us know what your thoughts of today's workshop are. You can share comments with Dr. Clark as well in that survey. I want to invite you to our next caregiver webinar, Understanding the Aging Process, How Aging Affects Your Nutritional Status. That will be Wednesday, July 19th from noon to 1 o'clock. In that webinar, Diane Reinhold from University of Illinois describes how the aging process is associated with physiological changes, and it can impact one's ability to meet their nutritional needs and ultimately age well. So I hope you can join us. And again, thank you everyone for your time, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.